The meeting was meant to be closed. Phones face down, doors shut. The CEO stood at the head of the table, already irritated by a schedule slipping out of her control. That was when the sound started again. Water. A mop dragged across tile, slow, steady, too close. She stopped mid-sentence. Across the glass wall, a janitor moved without looking up, a man she had passed for years without knowing his name. She felt something tighten, not anger yet, but the threat of it. Authority depends on silence. Respect depends on being obeyed. She opened the door and raised her voice. The room watched. The janitor froze. And before he could answer, a small figure ran down the hallway and wrapped her arms around his legs. The CEO recognized the child before she recognized the moment. Nothing that followed could be taken back. If you're still here, subscribe. Not for noise, but for stories that leave marks. The janitor arrived before most of the lights were on. He signed in without looking at the clipboard, slid his badge back into his pocket, and took the cart from the corner where it always waited. The wheels squeaked on the first push. He made a note to oil them later, though he knew he probably wouldn't. There was always something else that came first. He filled the bucket slowly, testing the water with his hand, before adding cleaner. Too much soap left streaks. Too little meant doing the same stretch twice. He had learned the balance through repetition, not instruction. No one had trained him for this building. They just handed him a map and a schedule, and assumed he would figure it out. He always did. By 8:30, the floors outside the executive wing were usually empty. Meetings didn't start until 9, but people liked the quiet before them. He planned around that. He always did. Today, though, the daycare had called just before he clocked in. His daughter had forgotten her jacket again. He told him he'd bring it when he took his first break. That shifted everything by a few minutes. He checked his watch as he pushed the mop along the hallway. The glass walls reflected his movement back at him. Bent shoulders, steady arms, a man shaped by tasks that never ended. He kept his eyes down. Looking up didn't change anything. Inside the largest conference room, chairs were already filling. He could hear voices through the glass, muted but sharp. Laptops opening. A throat cleared. Someone laughed too loudly, then stopped. He slowed his pace without meaning to, listening for the rhythm of the meeting so he could stay out of it. The CEO arrived last. She didn't rush. She never did. She placed her folder on the table, adjusted the chair at the head, and waited until everyone else had settled. Only then did she sit. Silence followed her movements like a habit the room had learned. She scanned the agenda once more, though she already knew it. The meeting was behind schedule before it started. 2 people hadn't sent their numbers. One department was about to be cut, though no one in the room knew it yet. She felt the familiar pressure settle behind her eyes. Not stress exactly, but focus. Order mattered. Without it, things slipped. As she began to speak, the sound reached her faintly at first. A soft drag. Water moving across tile. She ignored it. Buildings made noise. People worked. That was expected. She continued, her voice even, controlled. The janitor moved closer to the conference room doors, unaware of how clearly the sound carried inside. He adjusted his grip and wrung the mop once more. The bucket echoed briefly, then quieted. He worked faster, aware of the time now. He still had to reach the east stairwell before his break. Inside, the CEO paused mid-sentence. The sound came again, louder this time. Too close. She felt irritation rise, sharp and unwelcome. Meetings like this required attention, required respect. She waited a second longer, expecting it to stop. It didn't. Across the glass, she noticed movement. A figure in blue, bent slightly forward, passing the door without looking in. The mop traced a slow line along the floor, leaving behind a wet shine that caught the overhead lights. She stopped speaking. The room went still, waiting for her to continue. No one turned to look yet. They had learned better than that. She felt heat in her chest. Not anger exactly, but the sense of being interrupted in a place where interruption wasn't supposed to exist. She stood. The janitor heard the door before he saw it open. The change in sound made him look up at last. For a moment, he thought he had misjudged the time. Maybe the meeting had ended early. Maybe he had wandered too close. The CEO stepped into the hallway. She was smaller than he expected, but her presence filled the space anyway. She looked past him first, at the floor, then back up at his face. Her expression was tight, controlled, already decided. The mop water dripped once onto the tile. Inside the conference room, the executives waited, eyes fixed on the open doorway. No one spoke. No one moved. Whatever was happening now was not on the agenda, but it belonged to her. She drew a breath, preparing to speak. The janitor straightened his back and tightened his grip on the handle, bracing without knowing why. Down the hallway, a door opened. Light spilled out from the daycare wing. Small footsteps followed, quick and uneven, heading toward them both. The CEO didn't hear them yet. The janitor did. He turned just as his daughter came into view, her hair still half-tied, her backpack bouncing against her side. Her face broke into a smile when she saw him. "Dad." She ran. The child reached him before the CEO spoke, her arms wrapped around his legs without hesitation, her cheek pressed against his knee as if this hallway belonged to them. The janitor's first instinct was to pull back, not from her, but from the room watching. He glanced toward the open conference door, then down at her, his hand hovering for a moment before resting on her shoulder. "Hey," he said quietly. "You're supposed to be inside." She didn't answer. She tightened her grip instead, as if she had already decided where she was meant to stand. The CEO felt the shift before she understood it. The interruption she had prepared to correct had changed shape. The hallway no longer belonged to her alone. Something personal had entered it, something unplanned. She noticed the child's small shoes, the way one lace was tucked in and the other wasn't. She noticed the janitor's hand on the child's shoulder, careful, restrained. She also noticed the eyes behind her. The executives had leaned forward slightly in their chairs. No one had spoken, but attention had sharpened. This was no longer a private correction. It was a moment unfolding in full view, and she was aware of her role inside it. She straightened her shoulders. "This meeting is in progress," she said, her voice firm but not raised. "We need the hallway clear." The words landed cleanly. They always did. She had spent years learning how to say things once. The janitor nodded immediately. He didn't argue. He didn't explain. He slid his hand more firmly onto his daughter's shoulder and tried to guide her back the way she had come. "Come on," he murmured. "We'll talk later." She pulled back just enough to look up at him. Her face changed, the smile fading into confusion. She glanced at the woman standing in front of them, then back at her father. "But you're working," she said. The sentence was simple. It wasn't loud. It wasn't meant for anyone else. Still, it carried. The CEO felt it register in the room behind her. Not as disagreement, but as information. She held her expression steady. Children didn't understand schedules. That was all this was. She had already decided how this would end. "Yes," she said, her tone clipped now, "and this is not the time." The janitor felt the heat creep up his neck. He had worked this building for 3 years. He knew when to speak and when not to. He bent slightly, lowering himself to his daughter's height. "Go back," he said. "I'll be there soon." She didn't move. He glanced again toward the conference room. Faces were turned away now, pretending not to watch. He could feel the pressure anyway. This was not his space. He was meant to pass through it quietly, leave no mark. The CEO waited. Authority to her was not volume, it was stillness. She had learned that silence could be a tool if used correctly. She let the moment stretch, confident it would resolve itself. The janitor took his daughter's hand. She resisted for a second longer, then finally let him lead her back down the hall. She looked over her shoulder once, not at the CEO but at the mop bucket still standing by the door. "I'll be right here," she said. "Don't forget." He nodded, though he wasn't sure what she meant. When they were far enough away, he returned alone. He repositioned the bucket, wiped a small spill with his shoe, and resumed mopping. His movements were quicker now, less careful. He wanted to be finished before anything else could happen. The CEO watched him for another second. Then she turned back into the conference room. She closed the door behind her and took her seat without comment. The meeting resumed, but the rhythm had shifted. She noticed it in small ways. A delayed response. A question that came half a beat too late. She corrected where needed, her voice steady, her posture unchanged. Order returned, or something like it. Still, she found her attention drifting once more to the hallway. The sound had stopped now. The floor beyond the glass shone clean, reflecting nothing but light. She told herself that was how it should be. The sound came back 10 minutes later. Not loud, not careless, just present. The CEO paused again, this time longer. The numbers on the screen blurred at the edges as her attention narrowed. She had already corrected the interruption once. The hallway had been cleared. The expectation was set. Whatever this was now felt deliberate, even if she knew it probably wasn't. She stood before thinking it through. The door opened harder than before. The sound carried into the room, sharp enough to pull a few heads up. She stepped into the hallway with purpose, her heels clicking once against the tile. "Why are you mopping during my meeting?" Her voice was louder than she intended. Not a shout, but close enough that it echoed. The words moved faster than context, faster than restraint. The janitor froze. The mop stopped mid-stroke, leaving a dark line across the floor. He looked up, startled. His first instinct to apologize already forming, though he wasn't sure for what. He saw the open door, the people watching now without pretense. He started. That was when his daughter appeared again. She had slipped out while the attendant's back was turned, small feet carrying her faster than fear. She ran straight to him, wrapping her arms around his legs as before, but tighter this time, her face pressed into his thigh. The hallway changed. The CEO recognized the child immediately, the shape of her face. The jacket she herself had zipped that morning, the one with the missing button. Recognition didn't arrive as relief. It landed like a weight. For a second, no one spoke. The janitor's hands hovered again, uncertain. Then he rested them on his daughter's back, one hand flat, the other curled slightly as if afraid of holding too tightly. His eyes stayed down. He did not look at the CEO. He did not look at the room. "I was just finishing," he said quietly. The apology sat beneath the words, unspoken but clear. The CEO felt the room watching her now, fully. This was no longer about a hallway. It was about her response. She was aware of her breath, of the way her pulse had quickened. She had raised her voice. She could not undo that. She looked at the janitor's badge for the first time. The name was smudged, half-worn from use. She read it anyway. The child shifted and looked up at her. "He cleans here," she said, "so we can stay." The sentence was simple. It wasn't meant to accuse. It wasn't meant to defend. It was only true. Something in the CEO's expression faltered, just briefly. Not enough that most people would notice, but enough that she felt it herself. She had built her authority on clarity lawns between roles. This moment blurred them. She straightened. "Please," she said, her voice quieter now. "Take her back inside." The janitor nodded again. He guided his daughter away, one hand firm, the other still resting on her shoulder. She didn't resist this time. She glanced back once more, her eyes meeting the CEO's without fear or judgment. "Don't be mad at him," she said. "He's just doing his job." Then she was gone. The janitor returned to the mop. He finished the last stretch of floor without looking up. When he was done, he wheeled the cart away, careful not to make noise. Inside the conference room, no one spoke as the CEO returned to her seat. She adjusted her folder, smoothed the edge of the paper, and resumed the meeting exactly where she had left off. Her voice was steady, but the room was different now. The meeting ended on time. That alone would have felt like a victory on most days. People gathered their papers, closed their laptops, and stood in practiced unison. The CEO remained seated for a moment longer than usual, her hands resting flat on the table. She watched the room empty in stages, each person nodding to her as they passed, careful not to mention what had happened. No one did. When she finally stood, the hallway outside was quiet. The floor was dry now, the shine dulled as it always was once the light shifted. The janitor was gone. Only the faint smell of cleaner remained, sharp and clean, as if the space had erased itself. She walked toward her office, but slowed near the daycare wing without meaning to. The door was closed. A paper sun was taped to the glass, its edges curling. Inside, children's voices rose and fell, unstructured and unconcerned. She didn't go in. In her office, she closed the door and stood there for a second, listening to the silence settle. She loosened her jacket and placed it over the back of her chair. The movement felt heavier than it should have. She sat, opened her laptop, then closed it again. The moment replayed, uninvited, the way her voice had carried, the way the mop had stopped mid-motion. The child's arms around her father's legs, certain and unafraid. The sentence, "He cleans here so we can stay," repeated without emphasis, just fact. She pressed her fingers against the desk, grounding herself in something solid. She had not intended harm. She knew that. Intent mattered. It always had. Still, intention did not erase impact. That distinction had always applied to others. She felt it apply to herself now. Downstairs, the janitor clocked out late. The reassignment came without ceremony. The supervisor met him near the supply closet and handed him a revised schedule. Executive wing cleaning would move to after hours, effective immediately. No explanation was offered, none was needed. He nodded and folded the paper carefully, sliding it into his pocket beside his phone. The change meant fewer daytime hours, longer evenings. It meant he would have to adjust daycare pickup again. He did the math in his head and felt the familiar tightening in his chest. He did not argue. He retrieved his jacket from his locker and waited outside the daycare until his daughter was released. She ran to him again, as she always did, but this time he caught her earlier, lifting her just enough to stop her momentum. "Easy," he said. "Did you finish?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "I finished." They walked home together. He listened to her talk about paint and snack time, about a story read aloud that she didn't like. He nodded at the right moments. When they reached their building, he carried her up the stairs, feeling the weight of her settle against him, familiar and steady. That night, he laid out his uniform for the next day, then folded it back up. He would start later now. He set his alarm differently. Small changes, but they added up. The CEO stayed late as well. She reviewed reports she had already approved. She read emails twice. She found herself watching the time, aware of when cleaning crews usually passed her door. When footsteps sounded in the hall, she looked up, then back down. They did not stop. She left the building after dark. The lobby was empty. The security desk quiet. As she stepped outside, she noticed a small jacket on the bench near the entrance. Child-sized blue with a missing button. She picked it up without thinking. Inside, the guard looked up. "Daycare," he said. "Someone left it earlier." She nodded and carried it back in, placing it on the counter by the elevator. She stood there for a moment, hand resting on the fabric, then withdrew it as if it were warm. The next morning, the hallway outside the executive wing was already clean when she arrived. There was no bucket, no cart, no sound. The absence registered immediately. She slowed, noticing the silence where movement had been. She told herself it was efficient. She told herself it was appropriate. Still, she paused before her meeting, standing alone in the hallway, unsure of what she was waiting for. Nothing happened. She went inside and closed the door. The new schedule settled in quickly. For the janitor, it meant arriving when the building was already winding down. The lights were dimmer then, fewer floors lit at once. Conversations were shorter, less guarded. People didn't mind being seen by him after hours. Some even nodded. A few said hello. It was different, though not easier. He picked his daughter up later now. The daycare stayed open, but only just. She waited by the window most nights, her jacket on even when it was warm. When he arrived, she didn't run anymore. She watched first, as if checking whether he would disappear again. "Sorry," he said each time, though nothing had gone wrong yet. "It's okay," she said. She said it too easily. At work, he moved through the executive wing without being told to. The keys still fit. The map hadn't changed. Only the time did. He cleaned the same floors he always had, but now the rooms were empty, the chairs pushed in, the tables marked with faint rings from coffee cups. The glass walls reflected only himself. He worked slower at night. There was no reason not to. He could wring the mop as many times as he wanted. He could redo a stretch if it didn't feel right. The quiet made space for thought, and he found he didn't like that part of it. Once, near midnight, he stopped in front of the conference room where it had happened. He stood there longer than necessary, looking at the floor. The line from where the mop had frozen was long gone. He knew that. Still, he searched for it, as if proof might remain. Upstairs, the CEO noticed changes too, though she didn't name them. Meetings continued. Decisions were made. The building ran as it always had, but she found herself aware of transitions she had never paid attention to before. The moment when day staff handed off to night crews, the way the lights shifted floor by floor, the sound of elevators moving after hours. She left later than she used to. Not always, but often enough that it became a pattern. She told herself it was temporary. There was a quarter to close, a board review coming. Still, when she stepped into the hallway at night, she listened. Sometimes she heard the cart before she saw it. The squeak of wheels, softer now in the emptier building. She did not step out. She stayed behind her door, aware of the distance she had helped create. The first time they crossed paths again, it was brief. She was leaving her office as he entered the wing, cart in front of him, eyes already down. She stopped automatically. He did too, a few steps away. They stood facing each other, the space between them clean and empty. "Good evening," she said. "Evening," he replied. That was all. He moved past her without hurry. She watched him go, noticing the way he kept to the edge of the hallway now, giving more room than necessary. The behavior was subtle, practiced. She recognized it for what it was. At home, the janitor adjusted again. Dinner came later. Baths were rushed. Stories were shorter. His daughter fell asleep faster now, her questions trailing off before answers were finished. He sat beside her bed longer than before, watching her breathe, counting until he felt steady enough to stand. One night, she opened her eyes as he rose. "Are you in trouble?" she asked. "No," he said. "You got yelled at," she said. It wasn't a question. He hesitated, then smoothed her hair back. "It's over." She nodded, satisfied, and closed her eyes again. He stayed until she slept. The next morning, he received an email. It was short, impersonal. A reminder about performance standards. A note about professionalism in shared spaces. He read it once, then deleted it. He didn't tell anyone. The CEO read a different email that day. HR had flagged the schedule change as compliant, routine. No formal complaint had been filed. No follow-up required. The language was neat, resolved. She stared at the screen longer than necessary, then closed the message without responding. Later, she passed the daycare wing again. The jacket was gone from the counter. The bench outside was empty. She paused anyway, her hand hovering near the glass. Inside, children sat in a circle, listening to a story. She saw her daughter among them, legs crossed, attention fixed forward. She did not wave. That night, as she prepared for bed, she caught herself checking the time. She pictured the janitor unlocking the supply closet, rolling out the cart, beginning again. She pictured his daughter waiting by the window. The thought settled uneasily. At work, she had always believed that consequences were a sign of order. Actions led to outcomes. Systems corrected themselves. Now she saw the gaps between those steps, the quiet places where correction fell on the wrong person. She did not sleep well. The next evening, she left her office and waited in the hallway longer than usual. When the cart appeared at the far end, she did not turn away. She stayed where she was. The janitor slowed when he saw her. He adjusted his grip on the cart and considered turning down a different corridor. There was no rule against it. The building was empty enough that detours were easy. Still, he kept moving forward. Avoidance took effort too. The CEO remained where she was, hands at her sides, posture unchanged. She watched him approach, aware of how deliberate her stillness must look from his side. She did not step into his path. She did not smile. They stopped a few feet apart. "I wanted to ask," she said, and paused. The words didn't come the way they usually did. She chose the next ones carefully. "Is the new schedule working for you?" It was not an apology. It was not an order. It was an opening, narrow and unsure. He considered her face, searching for something he could use to guide his answer. He found none. She looked the same as she had in the meeting, composed, controlled. Only her eyes held a different focus now, less distant, more intent. "It's fine," he said. The answer came easily because it was what he always said. He did not expand. He did not offer detail. He rested his hand on the cart handle, a quiet signal that he was still working. She nodded once, accepting the limit he had set. "I wasn't aware," she said, then stopped. The sentence felt unfinished. She let it remain that way. "About the timing." "Before." He waited, unsure whether she meant the meeting or the day itself. She shifted her weight slightly, a small movement that broke the symmetry of her stance. That shouldn't have happened the way it did. The hallway absorbed the words without reaction. There was no one else to hear them. He nodded. Not in agreement. In acknowledgement. "It's over," he said. He did not mean it as reassurance. He meant it as fact. She felt the boundary then, clear and firm. Recognition did not grant her access. Understanding did not give her permission to revise the moment. The schedule had changed. The consequences had settled. Her daughter's voice echoed faintly in her memory. "Don't be mad at him." The simplicity of it made everything else feel unnecessarily complicated. "I'd like to make it right," she said. He looked at her then, really looked. For the first time since the meeting, he saw effort in her expression, measured and restrained. He also saw uncertainty, something he hadn't expected. "I don't know what that means," he said. The honesty was quiet. It was not a challenge. She took a breath. "If there's something..." He shook his head gently, stopping her. "I just want to work." The answer closed the space between them without filling it. She understood then that repair was not something she could direct. It could not be managed like a department or scheduled like a meeting. She stepped back. "All right," she said. "Thank you for your time." He nodded again and pushed the cart forward. The wheels squeaked softly as he passed. She watched him move down the hallway, noticing the care in his pace, the way he navigated corners without looking. At the daycare, his daughter waited as usual. She saw him through the glass and stood, her chair scraping lightly across the floor. He waved, small and brief. She waved back with both hands. When she reached him, she looked up and frowned. "You're late," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry." She considered this, then nodded. "Okay." As they walked home, she kicked at the cracks in the sidewalk, counting under her breath. He listened. When she reached 10, she started again. Behind them, the building's lights went dark, floor by floor. The executive wing dimmed last. Upstairs, the CEO remained in the hallway after he was gone. She stood alone, the silence pressing in differently now. She understood something had shifted, but not enough, not in the way she had hoped. That night, she opened her calendar and blocked off an hour the following week. She did not label it. She closed her laptop and sat in the dark for a long time, considering what it would cost to step out of the role she had built so carefully. She did not decide yet. But the thought stayed. The hour stayed on her calendar. She noticed it each morning when she opened her schedule, an empty block in the middle of a day otherwise packed tight. She considered deleting it more than once. No one would question its absence. Still, she left it there, letting it hold space she had not yet defined. When the day came, she closed her office door and made the call herself. HR answered on the second ring. The conversation was brief. She asked questions that were specific, procedural. She listened without interrupting. When she spoke again, her voice was steady, but she did not soften it with explanation. "Yes," she said, "that's correct." She ended the call and sat back, hands folded in her lap. The decision felt smaller than she had expected. Not easier, just contained. The change was announced quietly. An email went out later that afternoon. It was framed as a temporary adjustment, a redistribution of oversight during a restructuring phase. Titles shifted slightly. Responsibilities moved. Her name remained, but not where it had been. People noticed. Some stopped by her office with polite questions. Others sent short messages, carefully worded. No one mentioned the meeting. No one mentioned the janitor. The language stayed clean, professional. She answered when needed and deflected when she didn't. By the end of the day, the tone around her had changed. Not dramatically, just enough that she felt it. That evening she walked the building alone. She passed the conference room, the hallway, the daycare wing. She paused at each place without stepping inside. The spaces felt familiar but altered, as if furniture had been moved slightly out of alignment. When she reached the supply closet near the executive wing, she stopped. The janitor was there, restocking his cart. He looked up as she approached, surprise flickering across his face before settling into neutrality. "They told me the schedule's changing back," he said. Not accusing, just stating. "Yes," she said, "if that worked for you." He nodded slowly. "It helps." There was no gratitude in his voice. There didn't need to be. The exchange was even now, balanced in a way it hadn't been before. She hesitated, then spoke. "The oversight shift means I won't be leading those meetings anymore." He looked at her, processing. The information seemed to register only as context, not confession. "I see," he said. She waited for something else. Acknowledgement, perhaps, or judgment. It didn't come. "My daughter likes seeing me work," he added after a moment. "During the day." The sentence landed softly. Not as praise, not as leverage, just truth. "I know," she said. They stood there, the carpet between them, both aware of what had been lost and what had been traded to restore something small but real. He finished restocking and closed the closet door. The click echoed briefly. "I should get back," he said. "Of course," she replied. As he walked away, she noticed he no longer hugged the wall. His path down the hallway was straight, unhurried. The cart wheels squeaked, unchanged. That night she went home earlier than usual. Her daughter was already asleep. She stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her chest rise and fall. The jacket with the missing button lay folded on the chair. She picked it up and began to sew. Her movements careful, imperfect. The needle slipped once, pricking her finger. A small bead of blood formed. She wiped it away and kept going. By the time she finished, the button sat slightly crooked. She left it that way. The hallway was already busy when the meeting began. Not loud, just active. Footsteps passed without pause. A cart rolled by once, then again, farther down. The sound was not hurried. It did not stop when the doors to the conference room closed. Inside, the chairs were arranged differently. The CEO was not at the head of the table. She sat halfway down the side, her folder closed, her phone face down. She listened more than she spoke. When questions came, she waited until they settled before answering. When the discussion drifted, she let it, then brought it back, without raising her voice. The meeting ran long. No one seemed bothered by it. Outside, the janitor moved steadily through the hallway. He worked around people instead of waiting for them to clear. When someone stepped aside, he nodded. When someone didn't, he adjusted. The mop left clean lines behind him, visible for a moment, then fading as the floor dried. At the daycare, his daughter watched through the glass as she always had. This time, when she saw him, she smiled but stayed where she was. She lifted her hand and waved once. He waved back, matching her restraint. She returned to her seat. The CEO noticed the movement from the corner of her eye when the meeting finally ended. People stood and gathered their things. A few lingered, continuing conversations that no longer needed her approval. She waited until the room thinned, then stood and stepped into the hallway. The janitor was there, closer now, finishing a stretch near the door. She did not speak. She watched him wring the mop, careful not to drip. She watched him guide the cart aside so a group could pass. No one flinched. No one looked twice. When he finished, he lifted the mop and hung it back in place. The action was practiced, complete. He glanced up and saw her. This time, neither of them stopped. They passed each other at a normal pace. "Morning," she said. "Morning," he replied. Their voices were even. No one slowed to listen. Later that day, the CEO walked her daughter to the daycare herself. She knelt to straighten the jacket with the repaired button, Her daughter tugged at it, testing the hold. "It's crooked," she said. "I know," the CEO said. Her daughter smiled, satisfied, and ran inside. The CEO stood for a moment longer, then turned away. In the afternoon, a different meeting ran late. The sound of cleaning continued outside the room. No one commented. No one paused. The sound blended into the building's rhythm, no more intrusive than the hum of the lights. The CEO noticed it and did not react. When she left that evening, the lobby was active. People moved through it at different speeds, crossing paths without collision. The janitor passed through with his cart, heading toward the east stairwell. His daughter waited near the exit, sitting on the bench, swinging her legs. He reached her and set the cart aside. She stood and wrapped her arms around his waist, brief and certain. He rested his hand on her head, then stepped back. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded. They walked out together. From the glass doors, the CEO watched them go. She did not follow. She did not call out. She stood where she was until they reached the sidewalk, until they blended into the movement of the street. The building behind her settled into evening. Inside, the floors dried, the light shifted. The day completed itself without instruction. When the CEO turned back toward her office, she walked at a different pace than she had before. Not slower, just unguarded. The hallway was not silent, and no one tried to make it be.